What has been one of the worst-kept secrets on the grid has finally revealed itself. The FIA is considering expanding the grid for one more team, and it seems like we'll have 11 teams in the near future. While it appeared that this was an impossible task just a few weeks ago, with Domenicali publicly stating that Formula One is opposed to expansion, Ben Mohammed Sulayem has tweeted otherwise, and now Andretti is knocking even harder on the sport's door. However, he and his company will meet severe hurdles in order to join the grid, so not everything is over. Just a couple of days ago, the president of the governing body of the sport, Ben Mohammed Sulayem, tweeted about him and the FIA having a conversation regarding the 11th team on the grid. This has been talked about for such a long time, with Andretti showing initial interest again in 2020. However, there were lots of hurdles set by the FIA, and now that Andretti has finally passed them all, the company is waiting for the green light from the FIA in order for them to join the grid from 2024 on. While the tweet from the president of the FIA is the first step towards the scenario, it's still far from over. Yes, the governing body has expressed interest in having an 11th team, and it seems like Andretti is fulfilling all but one step of the official tender criteria that we are about to mention, but that doesn't mean that they aren't ready to compete in the most elitist racing competition in the world. As we just mentioned, there's something called due diligence that is to be applied to the potential candidates that are to enter the grid, and it consists of 4 key areas, with them being the technical ability and resources of the team, the ability of the team to raise and maintain sufficient funding to allow participation in the championship at a competitive level, the team's experience and human resources, the FIA's assessment of the value that the candidate may bring to the championship as a whole. Obviously, the first 2 are not so big of an issue, given the fact that Andretti is raising a 575,000 square foot facility in Fishers, Indiana, regarding all of their existing racing competitions and future projects, such as Formula One. This object is supposed to be fully operational from 2025 onward, right on time. Regarding the funding, Andretti has stressed that there are numerous investors from the United States who are eagerly awaiting for him to enter the sport so they can invest in Andretti F1. These aren't the issues of Andretti's entrance, but the fact that the team doesn't have experience and human resources from the start, which would mean that they'd be backmarkers and 2 seconds behind everyone else on the grid, is the more worrying fact. Now that Formula One is moving in a direction in which they're trying to bring racing closer and make the midfield more compacted, having 2 backmarkers on a calendar that has multiple street circuits is definitely not the right thing for the competitive spirit. And this brings us to the last point, which is the value that Andretti F1 will bring to Formula One. Obviously, it's going to be a very hard challenge for them to be competitive straight out of the gate, which would be the expectation of the fans. We've seen that Haas hasn't been able to find its groove in the sport, although they've been an equal participant ever since the 2016 season, as they still stand as the last team to ever enter the sport. But it seems like the FIA is ready to move on, and by move on, we mean adding an 11th team to the grid, which would be Andretti F1. Obviously, the popularity of the sport in the United States has increased immensely ever since 2020, mostly thanks to the documentary series Drive to Survive. Not only did we see an increased fan base in Austin, Texas, at the COTA, but we also saw the implementation of the Miami GP in 2022 and the Las Vegas Street Circuit from 2023 onwards. It's a massive step for the North American continent, which went from having a Cold War with the sport from 2005 onwards to having 3 tracks and potentially 2 USA-based teams on the grid with Haas and Andretti. In addition, Logan Sargent will be the first American-based driver since 2015, which is a step in the right direction for the United States and the sport. What doesn't go in the favor of Andretti is the team's reluctance when it comes to them joining the grid as the 11th team. You may assume why they would be mad, and you'd be right. It's about the money. It's always about the money, and the fact that the teams are going to lose 10% of the cake that they're receiving as revenue at the end of the season stands as a fact. To nullify this effect, the FIA is making every team that is about to enter the grid pay $200 million in dilution funds, as this money is going to be given equally to all of the teams on the grid to combat the division of the prize money at the end of the season. According to Wolf, a new team that is about to enter the sport needs to prove that it will bring more than it takes away from Formula One, which is practically impossible to prove given the fact that nobody knows how Andretti F1 will perform in their first couple of seasons. And according to Steiner, the dilution fund is a little too low because it was established in 2020 when the sport's popularity wasn't as high and inflation wasn't eating up all of the earnings of the teams on the grid. That is why the Haas principal believes that a change needs to be made in this aspect, and that's definitely something that other team bosses have discussed as well. However, a conflict is present, and that is a fact. When it comes to supporting Andretti F1's bid to enter Formula One, the American competitor only has two allies, McLaren and Alpine. Other than that, everyone else is reluctant about his team joining the grid, further adding that they will take away more from the sport than they bring in. On the other hand, Andretti has accepted the fact that the FIA is getting closer and closer to letting them in the sport, which is why Michael Andretti, the son of the former F1 champion Mario Andretti, has spoken about the starting lineup for Andretti F1 from 2023 on. When talking about this matter, he said that the team is likely going to start with one veteran driver and one young driver, with the younger one being Colton Herta. When it comes to the veteran, it appears that Andretti is already making waves in Formula One, as Michael stated that he is very close to Fernando Alonso and hopes to get the signature of the two-time world champion now that he has a 3-year contract with Aston Martin worth $15 million per season. But as we've seen with Alpine and Alonso, the Spaniard doesn't really care about the team he's currently on if he's presented with a better opportunity. At the age of 41, he's still a very much wanted asset, and that's something that shows how much Andretti would want to push in order to get Alonso as his driver. But still, one couldn't help but note that the president of F1 isn't really ready for an 11th team to enter the grid, as Stefano Domenicali has spoken multiple times about Formula One being a sport of quality, not quantity. And the fact that there are just 10 teams on the grid has never hurt the ambitions or the vision of the sport. Even he can't deny that the majority of the sport's revenue is now coming from the United States, and with 3 tracks being built there starting in 2023, fans will undoubtedly want to cheer for a true American team that employs American drivers, as opposed to Haas. Many have raised the question of how much time Andretti F1 needs in order to become competitive and score points, which is a very valid question because the last thing that Formula One needs is 2 more backmarkers on the grid. And to those who are asking themselves, why isn't Andretti completing a buyout on an already existing team? The answer is that they've tried numerous times to complete a buyout on Haas or AlphaTauri, but neither of those sides was interested in selling their interests to Andretti. Nevertheless, the money is here, the interest is here, and with the way the sport is moving, it would be the right thing to have an 11th team on the grid. After all, the sport is all about popularity and increased revenue, and with Andretti's promises, it seems like he is definitely bringing more to the table than taking away, which is the #1 reason why he should be allowed in the sport. What do you think about Andretti's entrance into Formula One? Let us know in the comments below.